Starting at the beginning of the year, Nathan shifted his focus exclusively to report on climate change because climate change is here and we're running out of time. You can find all our coverage in Civil Beat's special project, Hawaii 2040, which includes videos, stories, and other multimedia reports. To find out more, please visit us at civilbeat.org/Hawaii-2040. Now let's please welcome His Excellency, Anote Tong.
Wow, thank you everyone for being here. Thank you everyone who put this event on. Most of all, thank you for everything. What a film. It always tends to leave me a bit speechless. Makes me want to know where to go. But then after I kind of collect my thoughts, you know, it's very powerful. It's very stirring. And I don't think I'm alone in that it might inspire one towards action. But over the course of my reporting, I found that action can at times be a bit of a stumbling block for some folks at different levels. So I've interviewed various folks who are very passionate about this issue. They want to be involved, but they're not sure where to go. They're not sure what to do. So my first question for you is, as a now world leader on the issue of climate change, what advice would you have to folks who really care and want to be part of the solution?
I don't always have the answer to all of the questions that come up. And to be honest, there are times when I'm pondering over questions, but I don't always have the answer. But what I can share is really my own experience. And as I explained before, this really has taken over my life, okay? And the reason it has is because it's such an issue that it's like a mystery that has yet to provide an answer, okay? And but at the same time, it's a question that cannot remain unanswered. And as I explained in the process of my getting involved, when I got involved, initially it was as a leader, but then it became very personal. And with the frustrations and the sense of futility and that there's not much you can do about it. And of course, I went through periods of depression, really, trying to look into the future and what it would mean, not so much for me, but for my grandchildren. As I said, I do have a lot of grandchildren. And so somebody asked me, or you did, so you asked me about climate grief, is it?
Yeah, this morning.
Yeah, I never heard the term. Somebody mentioned it last night, and I didn't quite catch it. So I didn't know what climate grief is, but I think it's the sense of mental paralysis, not knowing what to do about an issue that's of such a magnitude that you really cannot explain what its real impact and who it would affect. So massive that it would appear to be so impossible to overcome.
For the folks, I mean, there's a lot of us, especially I think this room especially, are very interested in this issue and want to know what they can do. But I think there's another category of, you know, climate denialists, of course. But then I think there's also a lot in between. Folks who maybe aren't interested in the subject, who don't have the luxury to devote a lot of their time to. Do you have any comments for them?
Yes, I do. Usually I'm speaking at conferences where people really are already on your side. But at film shows like this, I come across people who really have never heard of this before. And sometimes at the end of a filming screening, people come up and say, you know, we never knew about this, but now that we know, we will do something about it. And I think, again, going from my own experience, it's not something that strikes you as being so urgent until you really delve into it so deeply as to be able to look into, because it's not about today. Today, there's no problem. I mean, this afternoon, as we were riding here in this beautiful city of Honolulu, nobody would have a sense of urgency that climate change is a problem. But if you're able to look into the future, see what has been happening, and then relate all of the events that are taking place all around the world, and read the reports that are coming out, then it will give you a clear picture. And the way I say it to my wife, I said, sometimes I wish I was so stupid that I did not see this coming, because it is a burden. And I wish that burden I would be able to throw it off me.
Does it matter if folks don't care? Should we be trying to win over hearts and minds?
If I knew the answer to that, I think I would be less stressed. But the reality is, it's not easy. But as I said, I was in Australia in October of last year, and I did a speaking tour in different cities, different universities. I even went to the parliament, trying to get to speak to the parliamentarians. And the point I make is, and I would make it again to an audience like you here, is that I'm sure a lot of you sitting here would never consider climate change an issue of relevance or significance to your lives. And the reason is because it hasn't touched you. And you don't think it will touch you tomorrow, nor would it touch your family over the next 5, 10 years. It may or may not. But the point that I made when I was in Australia, I said, this was October. I said, I'm sure this is what some of you feel, that it's not relevant to you. But I assure you, this coming summer, which was last summer in Australia, you're going to have your bushfires, you're going to have your storms and your flooding, you're going to have your droughts, and it's going to affect people, and you may not be affected, but maybe some of these people you may know. And that's an indication that it is coming closer and closer to you. And whilst we may be on the front line, and whilst we may fall, the next two who are not on the front line would then be on the front line. And unless we do address this challenge, it's going to keep knocking front line after front line.
In past conversations when I've heard you speak, one recently with, coincidentally, a good friend of mine, Miraj Desai at Yale, you talked about the connection between climate change and colonialism. Hawaii, of course, is no stranger to colonialism, so I was wondering if you could comment on how a history of colonialism has affected our response to a changing climate.
I think the reference was more in terms of how, as former colonies, our minds and not only our countries were colonized, but our minds, our culture, and everything about us had been colonized. And one of the impacts of colonization is you forget to relate at an equal level. And so having attained independence and having become part of the international community, we'd never really felt equal because we'd been so subjected in such a way that we do not regard ourselves as being on equal terms. And that has resulted in our sitting on the sidelines while all of what's happening now was unfolding, and we're not participating in the discussions. And while we were sitting on the sidelines, decisions were being taken in London, in New York, in Tokyo, in Paris, about issues which would impact today, which would impact our future generations. And so we had to shake away from that colonial mentality and really take control of our future. And I think this is one of the things that really has driven me, because I was angry that here we are, and we're just being told at the late stage that we don't have a future. And there's nothing we can do to change it. And this is why I've been so passionate to engage, because if we keep standing by the sidelines, it's going to keep happening.
Thanks. I wondered if... I wondered if we could delve a little bit deeper into that climate grief aspect. I think it's a toll that is being taken that we're feeling and hearing more and more about. And so I'm curious, on the one hand, how has it affected your own mental well-being now that you've been doing this for a decade and a half at least and no sign of stopping? I've interviewed numerous scientists now that say it's affecting their work. I've interviewed students who say It's debilitating at times, all these reports, one after the other of news and gloom. So is there anything that's helped you kind of pull yourself out of moments of despair and move forward?
You know, as I explained, it can be a very painful process. And for me, for a long period of time, especially when I was pretty much alone and thinking, and I felt, am I doing it right? Am I right or am I wrong? Because nobody else seemed to be following behind me. And after a while, of course, it happened. People started coming, following. Even in the Pacific region, I was the only leader in the Pacific talking about it at the time. Other leaders, in fact, have spoken about it in the past. In 1998, I think, the then Prime Minister of Tuvalu made reference to it. But I guess regrettably, he didn't have the time to really develop that argument and to take it home. I'm a little fortunate, if that is what you might call it, of having a long period. I was able to stay for 3 terms, and therefore could sustain that momentum and push. And so there was a time when I was getting other leaders in the Pacific coming with me. And then I had to provide space for them because I didn't want to take ownership. Okay? So I deliberately stepped back so they could move in, because I knew my term was coming up, and this battle has got to keep going. And so now it's so wonderful. We're hearing other leaders. We have my colleague from Tuvalu is passionate, sometimes a little tough on his statements. Of course, the Prime Minister of Fiji, Fiji having taken the presidency of the COP, did a wonderful job in pushing the agenda forward and making sure that the countries which are vulnerable are there to make the point, really take the point home. So, you know, it's everybody's fight. But as I say, we need more. And I've been, before at Paris, I visited a lot of capitals. I went to Europe, visited European countries. I did a lot of crazy things. Yeah, I did. And one of the things I did was to buy land in Fiji, of course, yeah. And, but you have to be a little radical, okay? But not too radical, because if you are too radical, people will then have a good excuse to dismiss you. And so it's got to be packaged properly to the point that you're rational enough not to be rejected outright. But at the same time, it's not an argument that everybody wants to hear. But I can see that that is changing. The young people's movement is the greatest boost to the campaign. But I don't believe it's going to take us over the hurdle. And the hurdle being, in spite of Paris, in spite of all that's happening, in spite of the protests, we still do not have a solution.
With things the way they are, I guess, at the federal level, from both in Kiribati and here, where there's kind of a dismantling of climate policies, folks have turned to the states and more local level to look for solutions. So yes. I've been reporting a lot about that, and our own legislature has done quite a bit in terms of setting big, bold goals that are very applaudable, but struggled a lot to kind of have the same big, bold action, including this session. So I was wondering, I mean, how does the public either make its elected officials more responsive to this pressing issue, or move forward if political leaders might be dragging their feet?
Yeah, that's been a strategy that I've tried to pursue, you know, because my experience has been climate policy, for example, in Australia. It was good. It was very positive. And then with the change of government, it's entirely negative, okay? And likewise in New Zealand, likewise in Canada, likewise in other countries, and of course most significantly here in the United States. I think it's a sad, sad development, because climate change is not a political football. It's not about politics. It's about people.
Well, you should tell Donald Trump that.
You want to get me locked up? No, but we've got to go beyond this. And I have had encounters with your state governors, and it was so wonderful to get people who believe in what they're doing. They know what they're doing, and not being dictated to. It's got to be a people's movement. If the government is not representing the will of the people, and then it's got to go. I was in Australia, as I said, I've just come from Australia, and I was asked questions, difficult questions. They're not difficult, I know the answer, but I couldn't say it. And they asked me, would you like to see a change of government here in Australia? And so, of course, my answer was this, I'd like to see a change in policy. If it takes a change of government, so be it. But it is not about governments. Because government, I'm afraid, may not be leading us in the right direction. They may be leading us towards our very destruction because the powers behind them may be leading them, because we must now come to understand, and here I question, we're a small developing country. Always at the end of the stick, when we are regarded as not performing well as a democracy. And when we break the rules, we are accused of not fulfilling our humanitarian objectives internationally. But now what I like to say is, are you here in the United States? Is your government a democracy? Okay? Is the government of Australia a democracy? Are they reflecting the wishes of the people or the wishes of those who help them?
I have a million questions for you, but I also want to make sure I leave time to let you all ask a lot of questions. So I'll ask one more, and then we can go ahead and turn it over to members here asking questions. The magic wand question. Next year, you have a magic wand. What do you want to see happen? Changes in world policy, world leaders, world action, at the top level or the public level? What do you want to see?
You know, what I've been arguing for is justice. Justice. Because there is no justice at the level beyond which there is no legislation. And so there is no international legal regime for dealing with this. When I had the argument with my colleagues from Australia, the Prime Minister from Australia and New Zealand, we were arguing before we went to Paris, trying to get a common position, because the Pacific countries, small ones, wanted to go for 1.5 degrees Celsius rise in global temperature at the maximum. They were arguing for no less than 2 degrees. And so we were at a conference, and we had the chairman who was the Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea, and I was sitting on his right, and these two were sitting here. I was the only one from the island country there. And they were saying quite arrogantly and without any feeling at all that 2 degrees was too damaging for their economies. And I was leaning over, looking at them like this. Are these two serious? And so I said, can I comment on what my colleagues are saying? He said, yeah, I hear them. I understand what they're saying. They're talking about their economies. But I tell you, 2 degrees, even 1.5 degrees, is far too damaging. It would damage the future of my grandchildren. And of course, and I say, how can you make it a comparison? Where is the moral? How is that a moral one? And of course, the media saw a fight coming, and they all wanted to ask questions, but of course, the conference was stopped there. But I think the point is this, and I made the comment subsequently. If you want 2 degrees, 3 degrees, 5 degrees, go ahead. But keep your emissions within your borders, and I have no problem.
We've got mics back there. We've got mics here. So let's go ahead and take some questions. Let's start over there on the left. Hold on, we have a mic for you. That way everyone can hear your question.
Our children here in Hawaii, especially elementary children, they all know that climate change is coming. And I think one of my students wants to know if you're going to build a spaceport in Kiribati.
Oh, I'm going to build many, many things. You saw the ark that I was going to build? You know, I think really, it's not there are no answers that have been coming forward. I attend several conferences, even while I was in office, and people ask me. I remember my encounter with the president of South Africa, who was the incoming president of the COP in 2011, or 10 or 11, I think 11. And he said, Mr. President, what you would like to go back with to your country, to your people? I said, you know, Mr. President, my people don't know about emissions, so they don't care whether it's 450 or 350 parts per million. They don't understand degrees Celsius, whether it's 2 or 1.5. But what they need is somewhere where they can go to next time there are strong winds and the tides are high. That's all they need. Somewhere which would guarantee the security and safety of their children. We once, when I was in office, we once sent out a warning, a tsunami warning, and everybody panicked because we have no high ground. So everybody went to the stadium, and there were those that probably gave up and went to church to make their confessions. But that is really what happened. People panic. And so when all of this comes down, that's the kind of thing that will happen. During Cyclone Pam in 2015, when Tuvalu was, all of the islands were flooded, so the waves were coming from one side and coming over. So it's a wonder that nobody was killed. But we can't afford for that to happen too often. Our southern islands suffered the same. And so knowing from the reports and the science that it's going to get worse, not better, we have to be ready. And the answer to the question, do I have? No, there is no solution yet. But at least we should be talking about solutions. And I really would like to be able to, as an example, kind of demonstration that it is possible to do something, no matter how ostensibly impossible it might be. But because we have no choice, because if we don't do it, then it's going to be really bad.
Let's go to this side. Maybe in the front.
I think you had the pleasure of meeting our former President Obama, and oh boy, I wish. Anyway, my question is, the film that we just watched was banned in your home country now. It must. How does it feel to see such an incredible transition in direction after all the effort that you put into to advocacy for climate change?
You know, as I said, I've always really been disappointed the way climate change becomes a political football. Well, the saddest thing is it is a political football in my country because the government that's in was in opposition. For some reason, I think it's not because of the science, but it's because of me. And it's very unfortunate. We are going through a process now where there's been a clampdown on foreign media coming into the country because most of them come and see me. And they tell my story, not the story the government is saying. Maybe it's an ego issue, maybe it's politics, maybe it's personal, but whatever it is, it seems stupid because it's not about me, it's not about politics, it's about the future survival of our young people. And we are running out of time. We are running out of time. It's so unfortunate. And I can tell you a lot of stories that, you know, it embarrasses me to talk about it because it doesn't make sense. And even just last week, I had to go to Fiji to meet a film crew wanting to do a story. They're doing a story around the world, and they wanted to visit Kiribati. And they couldn't come in because they were not given a permit to come in. So they asked me to come and meet them in Fiji. So that's not an isolated incident. There is a young man from Malta who's doing a PhD in Australia, but he's gone to do his research. It took him over a year to get a permit. Now he's got a permit, and I went to see him. And the condition of his permit is that he must not go and visit the village that's been washed away. And the area next door, it was on the film, that's flooded every time there is a high tide. And I can not see the rationale in placing those kind of reasons. What it seems is keep away from the trouble spots because you might tell the truth. I don't know what benefit there is in those kinds of conditions.
Let's go back over to this side. Maybe just kind of work our way back.
It's a very powerful movie, Mr. President. One thing that I was really interested, especially at the end of the movie, was that Kiribati is going to be essentially wiped off the map in the century. And I was wondering, from the cultural perspective, what is being done to preserve and archive culture of Kiribati when your people move away, and what would you like to see in terms of having your people remember your culture?
Yes, it's of course this is an unprecedented. What's about to happen is unprecedented, and quite frankly, I don't know the answer to that because we haven't got there yet. And I think at the moment we are focused on still continuing to be able to live on into the future. And as I said, I keep dreaming, and I have to get into a crazy mode to think that we will survive this. It's going to be difficult. It would almost be impossible, but I believe it is doable. And so hopefully that would address the question. It's not about running away entirely, but fighting as much as possible. When I talk about migration and relocation, it has to be the last resort. And if that is the last resort, then it must be done with dignity. Because we have seen what's happened in North Africa into Europe, that's undignified. Because the international community knew it was happening, but did nothing about it. And so we know this is happening. In case we cannot maintain the integrity of our islands and have to relocate, then we should have a plan in place. Something that doesn't wait for things to happen, but something that can start. And if that falls through, it's already in motion. And if migration with dignity is simply a proactive response to that possible eventuality, so that even when our people relocate, they must do so as skilled people. They must do so as people with dignity, as worthwhile members of the community they go into. And people who maybe one day participate very actively in that community. I meet them. We meet our communities. And I joke, I said, oh, I'd love to see you can. And you should continue to try. I'd love to see a few of you one day to be in parliament in this country. And, come on, I really would hope that one of you one day will become prime minister in this country. And that is true. I mean, your president was once a migrant. Okay? We all were, in one way or another.
Thanks. That's good. Yeah, over here.
What are we learning from Rambi Island, bought by the Banaba people and moving there? Thank you.
Now, that is another story. That's part of the colonization of our people. What happened was, and quite often a lot of people forget this, the Banaba is another island in Kiribati. And during the colonial period, phosphate was one of the highest grades of phosphate was discovered. And so in order to mine it, the colonial administration moved the people from Banaba to a land which was bought by the British administration in Fiji, in the island of Rambia. And so they were all moved to Banaba. And so that the British, the English, and New Zealand could mine the phosphate and supply their primary industries in Australia and New Zealand at highly subsidized fertilizer prices. And I found out the reason why. The reason was so that they could supply Europe after the war, when all of the agricultural industry in Europe was devastated. And Europe couldn't feed itself, including England. So that was the reason why they needed subsidized phosphate. So we have contributed towards the building of the agricultural industry in Australia and New Zealand.
How the people in Rambi are faring in relation to the previous question of perpetuating their culture in a different environment?
They're doing very well, and the reason is because they've gone there together. And they have a place which they call, it might as well be Banaba, but in Fiji. And so in that sense, they've been able to be more insulated. I have seen some of our communities who've moved from the Phoenix Islands to Solomon Islands. Now, they're scattered because they were not placed in one single spot. And so what has happened is there's a lot more, they moved a lot more recently in the 1960s, but their retention of the culture has not been as good as the ones in Rambi. And so I think that is an indication of what might happen if all of this were to come about.
Let's go back there.
I don't need a mic. I come from a family of 12 kids. So loud enough. Isang pula, give me sakana.
Oh, voilà.
Turang huku, turang ninggale. So as one Pacific Islander to another one. Let me take a different stance so that this doesn't end up as a boring meeting. You know, Kiribati has the 12th largest segment of ocean space in the entire world. The last figure I saw was approximately 3.5 million square miles. It's actually 3.441810 square miles. So you have a lot of territory. I mean, we intellectually tend to conceptualize territory only as land. The world's changing. With a country as small as Kiribati is, with a population of 160,000 and 310 square miles of land, you have an enormous territory located in a very strategic spot in the world. That's one of the reasons why you broke relations with China and now have diplomatic relations with Taiwan. It was a strategic security issue that led you in that direction. So that said, Mr. President, that said, and considering your present bet that more than likely you're going to have to move like the people of Rambi did eventually. By the way, footnote here, I happened to work in a top security position in Australia in the 70s for the Whitlam government. I saw the secret papers on the negotiations between the Nauruans and the Australians and the New Zealanders. If you have time, drop by the house and I'll tell you what happened.
Take you up.
If nothing else, we can share some powers. And maybe some breadfruit if you're really nice. But, you know, I think you're going to have to move. I wrote a paper in 1990 that was published by Oxford University Press, predicting more or less, you know, sometimes I think I should never have been a Pacific historian, I should have been a prophet. Maybe there would be more money in that. But, you know, as early as 1990, I recognized that this is the likely scenario that was going to occur, particularly for atoll. You're not a high island, you're an atoll. So, I think you're going to have to move. And I think buying land in Fiji is good public policy. It's a good backup position. I don't think you're going to get the kind of support that you want from Australia. Fundamentally, Australia is very racist at the top. And I say that having cut my intellectual teeth in Australia, got a PhD in Australia. So, and I worked at the apex of the Australian government. There is very little hope in Australia, I think. And you know, don't get edgy.
I'm just waiting for a question.
Don't get edgy. The president is a, what did you say you were, a radical what? Or was it the adjective before the radical? Yeah. You know, we can I can hold my own in this cage here. So,
Can we move on to a question? Sorry, there's a lot of folks who have questions.
Hold it. Hold it. I'm not going to take instructions from you. Look, the question is, we need to know, I need for you to shut up. So, Mr. President, now that this is getting interesting,
Okay.
why don't touch me? Sit down.
Oh, excuse me. So just, I'm going to step in here. Just.
What I am saying to you before this crowd gets at my throat, what I'm saying to you is for you to expect even anything approaching a substantial amount of money to address the problems of the people of Kiribati. You're fundamentally in the wrong country. But you know, you're a world traveler, you've been around, you beat the bushes, time is running out on you, but time is running out on all of us. Against that wordy background, I'd like to have your comments. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay.
Yes, I'm listening.
Let me try to answer that very long question. You know, I totally agree with you, but we once thought we were a small country until we came to realize that we are a huge ocean state with huge, huge resources. And I don't know what you've heard about the commentary, but it's a fact that one of the previous prime ministers of Australia said, yes, we would welcome the people from the Pacific. But in exchange, we will have access to their fish resources. Now, our fish resources are worth billions and billions of dollars. But at the moment, we only get 10% of the value on the side of the wharf before it's processed. And so we are getting a very tiny part, okay? Again, that makes us still a colony, a supplier of raw material to the rest of, to the developed world. We want to change that. And that's the point that I was making. With the partnership of people, not necessarily governments, we can do it. And we need to do it in order to build our climate resilience so that we do not expect any funding from the international community, from any country, because we would not need it. So we need to restructure this relationship. So I think, in a sense, I hope I've answered your question. I've come here, in fact, when I had the encounter with the Minister of Environment in Australia in October, she said, oh, you've come for the money. Well, wait for me, I'll sign my check. Very insulting. And of course, I pretended not to hear, but my colleagues couldn't take it, and they took it to Parliament. They wrote to the Prime Minister, and it was debated in Parliament. Now, as I was leaving on my way from Melbourne to Brisbane, as I walked out of Melbourne, the Melbourne airport, there was a camera crew, and they asked me the question, oh, we haven't seen the Minister of Environment. She seems to be missing in action. But remember that she was rude to you sometime last year. And so I said, why are you asking me? Come on. Surely you don't believe I have anything to do with your disappearance? Okay? But you're right. We could not put our entire trust, which means the survival of our people, in one single source of assistance. It would be better if we can rely on the resource that we have in abundance, but which we need to approach its exploitation in a different way. Thank you for those comments.
All right.
Before we move on to the next question, I forgot to state our rules for Civil Beat Q&As to please keep it civil. And in order to ask a question, we just ask that you keep your questions concise and not waste each other's time. Thank you.
Thanks.
Kuna Maori.
Maori.
I lived in your country for about 2 years in the early 80s, and we went through a flood. Like El Nino sent some stuff our way as well this time. Am I all
No,
right?
you're fine.
Okay. I don't know what's behind me. Anyways, but you know what I notice about an atoll is that it doesn't have the capacity to release the flood water. It doesn't have, you know, that when we were flooded, it was there for a long time.
Yes.
And fish were all over the land, you know. So my heart is breaking for you, sir, and I'm so amazed at what you're carrying, and I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for those comments.
We have a question in the back here that's, I'm just going to try to move around the room a little bit more.
Hi, Mr. President. My name is...
All the way in the back.
Hi, sorry. My name is Ikwalak. My English name is Serena. I am an Inuit from Nunavut in Canada. Hello. I want to say, please, thank you. Please and thank you. You are a wonderful truth teller. So, and that is why your movie is banned, and I'm sure you know all of this. I, too, am a truth teller, so I'm here to say, please, keep doing the work you're doing. We lost 3 men. We're not just trying to save the polar bears, by the way. We are trying to save ourselves. I promise you. But we lost 3 men because our ice is melting sooner and sooner. And they were 3 men in the same family, and it was so tragic. So for many of us in the Arctic, we were relocated. I shouldn't say we were moved, we were relocated. And it's very difficult. So with everything inside of you, try to encourage your people to have this plan together, because we were moved and removed separately, and I am a generation that does not know my language because of that. So I applaud you. Your hopes and your dreams, and it is a burden. I'm going to use that with this stupid, I wish I was so stupid because it's such a burden. And so I ask you, how do you see this new president helping your people move in one step? Because without it, you will lose a lot of the culture.
Thank you. I think I should maybe re-emphasize the point that it's always been our first option to try to stay on, whatever needs to be done. I don't know how futile that would be, whether we can stay for the next millennium or just the next 20 or 2 or 3 decades, or for the next 100 years. But I think for me, it's always been the first option. I am misinterpreted quite often, even from my own government. And I know I'm misquoted because I think it's because of the media, because the media always focuses on the exciting part. And the exciting part is about moving our people, okay? But my statements have always been that our first option is to build climate resilience. How to do it, whether by having floating islands or by building up the islands, I don't know, because that is a technical issue. I don't have the answer, but that would be a political decision. And on that basis, I hope we would not lose the culture. But at the same time, I know that it would be impractical to expect that we could ever generate the resources to raise all of the islands. But so maybe we have to content ourselves with just 1 or 2 islands. And it's not impossible, because already we have half of our population in one very small spot. All we need to do is build that, make it higher, and maybe just ask the rest of the people to come in, because in time they would have to come in, because the islands will go underwater. There is no question about that. I know that there are studies now being bandied around to reinforce the comments by the deniers, that the atolls will continue to rise above the rising seas. Maybe that might be the case. I don't know. But I don't think it's an issue that you can speculate over. The safety of people and the security of people is not a matter for speculation. And so I think my answer would be that if there is any relocation, it has to be as a last resort. Thank you.
All right, I think we have time for maybe one more.
Thank you for taking my question. Aloha, and thank you so much for coming here and having this forum that I've been waiting for a long time. I've been talking with the institutions here of government and at the university. I'm an architect, a bit of a dreamer, but I believe my statement has been, I think I've invented a barrier that will take the energy out of the wave, drop the sand on the other side of the barrier, and basically stop the sand going back into the ocean, something like a big bra. It actually sits in the beach like an iceberg, and I'm just wondering, because I have had so little success in talking to the professionals here about what I've got. The governor has seen it, and he's sort of sent me off to certain people, but it hasn't gone much beyond that because he doesn't have power to, delegate what people are thinking about or talking about. But my question to you is, do you have a dedicated engineering on all of that? Actually, on Tuesday, I'm going to be seeing a group of scientists and hopefully getting some traction there. Have you got a dedicated engineering group or think tank group or discussion group that I can drop my ideas into?
Okay, I don't. But I can refer you to a study which has been undertaken, which I initiated while I was still in office, in my desperate search for solutions. I started looking, and I must admit that I had to think of wild ways of trying to address the issue. I think that the gentleman made a comment, and I'm quite in agreement that we cannot expect and believe that 100%, there's no certainty that we would get the solution from the international community. And so I went ahead and worked on solutions on a bilateral level. And so I approached the United Arab Emirates. I know that the United Arab Emirates can do it. They build their islands. And so I approached them, and what they did was they sent to Kiribati the same engineers who built Palm Island. They're Dutch, okay? And I spoke to them and I said, oh, you're looking for the contract, aren't you? Okay? But it's going to be a huge project. And what it does is, it's about, I gave them the concept that I had in mind. It's about raising the islands above the projected sea level rise and storm surges. And unfortunately, I'd left office by the time the study had been completed, so I haven't seen it. And I would never be allowed to see it, but you can go and have a look at it. I'm sure the government would allow me. They would not allow me. But the study has been done. I also invited Korean engineers to come and have a look at it. So the study has been done. It was also done in collaboration with the New Zealanders. I know New Zealand now is taking possession of that, and the government is beginning to take possession. Frankly, I don't care who possesses it, as long as some work is going to be done. But please, share your ideas. And we don't have a dedicated engineering group. The work I've been doing after leaving office has been hampered pretty much by the lack of relationship with the government.
So how do you focus people's ideas? What I'm finding is that there are no forums about it.
You can.
There are people like you may have heard of the Seasteading Institute that just got closed down in Thailand.
Yeah.
And I'm surprised that they didn't actually go to Kiribati to find who was down there rather than go to Thailand, because they've just been deep six, and the guys got their sentence on them, and they take this stuff away. But there's got to be, I went to a conference about 3 years ago.
Real quick, I know we have to.
We'll go ahead and we'll just take one more real quick over here, and then we'll wrap up.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I really empathize with you, having spent time on Kiribati, Tarawa, and the people that I lived with. They've lost everything because where we lived was under 14 feet of water, and they have relocated to New Zealand. And believe it or not, they are happy in that little colony that you spoke of. My question is this: have you considered teaming up with those who are concerned about losing their islands, their island nations, their atolls, not just from climate change, but from other things like, for instance, the losing of all the coral because the fish are now gone because the ships came in and polluted the whole area? I know the Northwest Hawaiian Islands have gone through things like that. And if you were to team up with these people who have gone through so much, it is going beyond climate change. It is, we are losing our island nations, our atolls. Have you considered teaming up with them in any way?
Some years back, we established a coalition of atoll nations on climate change. So it involves the other countries like Tuvalu, the Marshall Islands, Tokelau, the countries that are very much on the front line. But what I believe you're discussing is the wider issue, the wider human issue. And I believe that we're all in this together. There is no question. I was in Canada recently, and I had the opportunity to meet with indigenous leaders, a council of chiefs. And they expressed the same problem. Their problem is the destruction of their land through the mining. And they're trying to fight the mining industry with very little success. And I think it's all about, this all has to do with justice, okay? What we are fighting here is trying to find justice. Let me end with a story, okay? And it's a story I think we'll just tell it all, because I think that's the only way to get it across to people, especially to people here in the United States. And it's about two neighbors who live next door to each other. And one of the neighbors had a tree which blocks his drive. So one day he decided to cut it. So he cut it. But the tree fell on his neighbor's house. And he went to his neighbor and he said, "Oh, my dear neighbor, your house is destroyed. What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it?" It's exactly our story. Our house is destroyed. But in the United States, the guy whose house was destroyed, "Oh my God, I'm going to take you to court." Can we? No, we can't.
Thank you so much.